alpine variety, a lot like a patty Bigfoot, sometimes described as a little more slender, still huge and imposing. But they have claws, they have fangs, they're fully vested in being a carnivore. I liken a type 1 to a grizzly bear. I liken these to a polar bear. Polar bears are purely carnivorous. They don't eat roots and berries. Grizzly bears will eat deer and whatever they can get their hands on, but they'll eat roots, berries, whatever. Um, I say these are pretty much like the polar bears. They like the cold, they like the remote climates, they like to hunt, and that's pretty much what a Wendigo species is. Now, a lot of you guys have probably heard of a Wendigo in the demonic sense, which is where you turn into like a cannibal and you have, you're really emaciated. I don't have that problem, but really emaciated, and they have antlers, and it's this. There's an actual psychological term called the Wendigo psychosis. It's a form of cannibalism, kind of like cabin fever, and the Native Americans have a type of Wendigo where they know that is a spirit, kind of like a skinwalker or something, where it's like it's a Wendigo, it's its own creature. Then they talk about a Wendigo being something else, of being a fully carnivorous Bigfoot, of a subalpine variety that likes the cold, that likes the mountainous regions, that likes to be left alone. And they have claws as opposed to fingernails. They have fully pointed teeth, and they are pretty much trouble. And there's a lot of speculation that maybe they're related to like a type 3, the one with the snout, but they just have a more, they don't have the snout, I guess. Or they're an offshoot, or like I said, I think the best thing I can compare it to is the difference between a polar bear and a grizzly bear. These are your polar bears. And so that's pretty much what a type 5 Wendigo is. They're very rare in the 48 states. I think like I was saying, Minnesota, Wisconsin, those kind of areas, North Dakota, those kind of areas, the very remote, cold regions, you get these things way back in hills. We're like, well, it was a Bigfoot, but it had claws and teeth. And it's like, well, okay, that was what they call like a Wendigo variety. Now, if any of you guys ever heard of the Genosqua? No. The Genosqua is a Native American legend from the Iroquois and other tribes all throughout the United States on the East Coast, where they describe them as cannibal stone giants. And that's why I was kind of asking some of the giant questions. And we'll get to another category of creatures here that gets into giants as well. The legend of the Genosqua. I was wondering how many more. Okay. The legend of the Genosqua, or the Shining Ones, or stone giants, was these are a Wendigo type Bigfoot, but they're a little bit more. They're not subalpine. They live in more temperate rainforests. They're on the East Coast. They're along the Appalachian Trail in the more northern parts, Pennsylvania, New England, that kind of stuff. And they talk about the normal types of Bigfoots, and they talk about the Genosqua. And what these guys do is it's very ingenious, and you can see there little Native Americans. This one's running with the head turned completely around, very impressive. And they're firing arrows at these guys. Well, why they call them stone giants is this species of Bigfoot, according to the Native Americans, they find tree sap, they find pitch and tar, they find mud, and they roll around in that tree sap and that mud, and they go scrape and break off chunks of branches and get all the zap and xylem to flow, and they roll around in their fur. Then they go roll in pebbles, then they go roll along on the beach, they go roll along in river rocks, and that adheres to their skin, hence making them the stone giants. And this is directly from what the Native Americans talk about. And they use primitive clubs and things like you might expect. But they talked about them being the stone giants. And the reason why they would go roll in all these rocks is, you got to remember, back in the day before metal, or at least here in North America, the arrowheads were made of stone. They were made of obsidian or flint or some kind of a rock. So what better way to repel rocks with rocks? So not only are they incredibly huge, which you think a Bigfoot would take quite a few arrows anyway, but they roll around on some rocks and get this all matted into their fur, and they basically got armor plating, and they could walk right into a tribe or an encampment or whatever, and they just take whatever they want. And the Indians lived in great fear of these things. They talked about the stone giants, the Genosqua. They great fear of them. And you heard a lot of reports. They kind of really died down as the white man showed up, as people settled, because one thing the stone giants did not protect themselves were from guns and muskets. So you got to hand it to innovation. That's one thing I'm sure the Indians were very happy that we brought over. Probably about the only thing. Because you hear a lot of the reports, you hear about Genoskwa happening in history, and then shortly, to the pre-colonial era, and then kind of in the colonial era as we really populated and all the plantations, and we did, the 13 colonies and all that stuff, a lot of the legend kind of died out. Well, I think that's because a lot of people shot them and they knew what guns were. Bigfoot in general knows what guns are, so they either retreated to the bush, got shot out, moved to different regions, died out. There's also the theories about Bigfoot getting diseases too, the transmittable from humans. But that's a whole nother subject. So you hear Genoskwa, the stone giants. Interesting enough for UFO people, they also refer to them as the shining ones, which not the kind of shining ones that they talk about biblically, but because they had all their stones caked into their fur for protection. So that's kind of an offshoot of the Wendigo. I don't know if it deserves its own type, but from all the research and other people in the Bigfoot world I've talked to, kind of come to the conclusion that I think we're talking about the same thing as a Wendigo, just it's a little bit more of a warm weather variety that likes to roll around in tree sap and rocks. So, well, it's kind of funny when they say cannibal giants, they refer to cannibals as eating people. Yeah, I didn't name them. Yeah, and it's very true, and a lot of the native tribes do consider Bigfoot a type of people, so maybe that's where they're coming up from. But I would not put it past these guys to eat their own. That's one of the most common things when people say, well, how come we haven't found a Bigfoot body? Like, well, some have reported, like the Choctaw, and since you brought it up, we're going to talk about it. The Choctaw and the Chickasaw claim that Bigfoot buries their dead. They have burial mounds, these big mounds of Bigfoot burial mounds, and they're like, yeah, we know they do it, they're sacred, we stay away from them. Then there's other reports, other tribes, that they eat their dead. Neanderthals are known to eat their dead. Humans, cannibals, we've been known to do it. You got to think, if it's in the middle of winter and it's tough hunting and it's hard to come by food, and I'm Unga and Gug over there drops dead, Ugga's dinner, You got to think there's a certain amount of practicality to it, as much as there would be some kind of sentimental value to each other that they had. And like I said, different temperaments, different types, hard times, good times. So I do think under certain circumstances, yes, they can be very much cannibals. I think if you have one tribe of Genoskwa fighting over maybe a river and another tribe on the other river, oh yeah, they probably kill each other, they probably eat each other all day long. So yes, but I found the Donner Parry story a little hard to swallow. Sorry. Yeah, a little hard to. Anyway, sorry. I can't help myself sometimes. So that's the Genoska Wendigo variety. Then you start getting into something else that's a little more true to what we were talking about. Now, very rare, very huge mountain giants. These are in the uppermost regions of like Montana, way back in the hills, going up into Canada. Alaska apparently has a lot of these things. And you have to understand, they're built like a basketball player. They are not built like if a Bigfoot is 10 feet tall and 5 feet wide, 1,200 pounds. These things are built more like Shaq. They're still very big, but they're a lot more slender. They're your classic kind of giant in description that people see in North America, where sometimes reported with red hair, typically not though, which is very interesting. Most of the time they're not reported with red hair, but they do report them with clubs. They do report them with crude clothing. They do have tusk and incisors coming from the bottom sticking out of their mouth. And their temperament is considered very, very bad. They hate humans. They look down at humans. They seem to be some kind of very ancient race from a long time ago. And once again, you get a lot of reports from people who aren't Bigfoot people, who aren't into any of this kind of stuff, that they're like, and what's really fascinating is you get a report of someone saying, yeah, man, I think I saw a Bigfoot. It looked like Shaq, but it was like hairy, and it was almost gray-skinned, and it had a club, and it was like 17 feet tall. And it was like, 17 feet tall? I don't think you saw a Bigfoot. And a lot of times, the tracks that they find are utterly huge, 25, 30-inch tracks, just ginormously huge tracks. And as you'd imagine, being upwards of 20 feet tall, they're also reported to have 3- and 4-toed tracks, which is quite a bit different than what you would expect like a Sasquatch track to be. Kat Hansen, who works a lot with Duke from World Bigfoot Radio, and I've talked to her before and followed a lot of her work. She's I think 3/4 are full-blood Native American. I forget which tribe, but she describes them as the district managers, which is really funny because if you have a valley or a wilderness area, and on this side of the river is a tribe of Bigfoot, and on the other side of the river is a tribe of Bigfoot, and the next canyon over there's maybe a tribe of Gugwees, the face eaters or something, and they're all kind of in there. Well, one side of that territory, one part of a mountain, there'll be a mountain giant. They come break up fights. They supervise. They don't really supervise. They're just kind of like they're the biggest, baddest thing out there. If they're keeping these other creatures, there's reports that if these creatures get too close to humans or start interacting too much, the mountain giants will step in and kill the Bigfoot that's doing it. They're not exactly a friendly manager. But like I said, there's a lot of reports of these things in Alaska. Some of the most fascinating reports in very remote areas of northern Montana and those kind of areas is you hear them a lot from construction sites, mining camps, where, they'll be out mining and, they go down logging roads and mining camps, and the next day they come out and a tractor or a backhoe has a boulder the size of a Volkswagen sitting on top of it, just completely crushed. And you could get a whole herd of Bigfoots and they couldn't lift a boulder that big. Or they would find giant footprints at a track, or they'd find, those big giant industrial bulldozers or cranes, the ones with the huge tank treads on them, tipped over. Or equipment smashed, and they're like, Bigfoot doesn't even comprehend how big some of these things get. And then really remote backpackers and hikers say that they've seen these things just walking along, doing their business. What they eat, where they go, who knows? They're very mysterious, but people do see them. And occasionally, like I said, you do get a Bigfoot report if someone's like, hey, it's like 15 feet tall. I'm like, no, that's not a Bigfoot. I think you're into something else. So the Type 7, everybody loves to talk about the Type 7s. I do too, because I love making Florida jokes. And it really does look like an orangutan. And these particular photos, this is the Myakka skunk ape photos. This was from 2003. It was an elderly lady in her backyard. This thing kept coming around, and I think it was stealing apples or something in her backyard. And she got so fed up with it that she actually snapped 2 pictures of it. You can see it there in the palmetto, and you can see kind of the other picture here, and you can see the canine teeth, the eye shine, and you can see a good close-up here. And she actually wrote a letter. Now, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she wrote a letter to the sheriff's department going, you got to come out and take care of this thing. This thing's been coming around here. And your first reaction from looking at these photos is the same reaction I had, like, this is an orangutan. This is an escaped orangutan, But till you realize in the letter she says it's 7.5 feet tall, which, yeah, orangutans, if you've ever been to the zoo, the San Diego Zoo, you see them up close. I mean, they're powerful, but they're really not that big, and they're really short. They're like 2 feet tall because they're not, because they're really hunched. Even the big males, they're huge, but they're really wide. They're not tall at all. And even if you've seen like National Geographic where they tranquilize one and lay it out on a table, even fully spread out, they're like 5 feet. They're not 7 feet tall. And what's really fascinating about these photos is not only did she describe it as being over 7 feet tall, if you take a look at how long these arms are, and you take a look at, well, this has to be back leg, and then you take fronds into exception, and then you take the ground in there, and how hunched over this creature is. Here's a really good, looks better on my laptop, sorry, but how long this creature is going from the ground all the way back up along its back, that is no orangutan. But it is very orangutan-like, which kind of makes you go, light bulb. It kind of makes you think, well, if the Type 1s look like a ape, they look like a gorilla. The Type 2s look like a chimpanzee. We got this weird Gugwe thing that looks like a baboon. And then we got these guys down in Florida, because Florida's got to be weird. They got these guys that seem to only be spotted in certain parts of Florida. This one from Myakka, and people report these things as they look like a big, giant, overgrown orangutan, an upright walking orangutan. with these incredibly long arms. I mean, look how long that arm goes down there. To have its head up here, it's like impossible. And then you look at the teeth. You know, you don't typically see a orangutan like that. By the way, primates, if they show their teeth, well, human beings are primates, so you just have to exclude us from that category. We smile as, hi, you know. In the primate world, if you show your teeth, it's a sign of aggression or a sign of fear. It's a don't hurt me, look at my teeth, or I'm going to hurt you, look at my teeth. So a little bit of advice, if you guys ever come across a Bigfoot, don't smile at him. Myakka? Oh, that's Myakka, Florida. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not up on my Florida geography quite a bit. But you've been to Florida, I assume? Yes, and Florida has tons. Florida is one of those states where you drive through like Tampa or like Miami or something, and it's these big giant buildings in St. Petersburg and all these beaches, and then you're like 20 feet from town, and there's just this giant grove of bushes and swamps. And it's everywhere. Like even in the middle of some of the bigger towns, there are like swamps and groves, and every puddle of water has an alligator in it in Florida. It's crazy. Yeah. So what's also fascinating, like I was saying, the type 2s, the wood boogers, the more chimp-looking guys, they're spotted in Florida too. So there's a lot of crossover here. Kind of like the Florida Panthers. Like Florida's the only place on the East Coast that really has mountain lions. They call it the Florida Panthers in one little area. And that's kind of like these guys. They kind of have a niche. It's the only time I ever hear anybody ever say anything about something looking like an orangutan versus a gorilla or a chimpanzee is in Florida. So that's a type 7. The skunk ape, if you will. They call them skunk ape because they do not smell good. You can imagine something primates sweat. They live in the bushes and in the jungles and in the swamps, and then they eat meat and probably rotting fruit and dig through trash and everything else you expect them to do. They don't smell good. So the type 8 is something that is not very well known, and I honestly don't think it's a type of Bigfoot, kind of like the mountain giant's not really a type of Bigfoot, but people are associating it with this phenomenon, so we're going to talk about it. And that's the devil monkey. These guys kind of scare me, actually, quite a lot. They're somewhere between like a dog and like a baboon or a mandrill, but baboons and mandrills get about maybe about this big on a human. Nasty, but they don't get very big. These things are chest height, a lot bigger. And they run around on all fours. People see them in packs. People see them in the Southwest. I think Virginia's got a pretty good history of them. A few spots on the East Coast have them. But occasionally people report something. Yeah, it was running around on all fours, kind of like a dog, but it looked more like a monkey. It had a tail. Bigfoots typically don't have a tail. It had kind of a snout, but it wasn't a gugwe because it wasn't upright walking. They report something, and the natives, and a lot of people call them devil monkeys because they're just really mean, nasty, overgrown baboon-looking things. And I'm like, well, that's nice. So yeah, just be aware that every now and then people do refer to something called a devil monkey, and they are out there, and there's really not a lot known about them. But people do see them. People do see them. And that's really about, I did a video on them a while back, and there's just really not that much known about these devil monkeys other than that people have talked about them for a long time. People have seen them a long time. But we really don't know what's going on with this. We really don't know what's going on with this phenomenon, but sometimes it gets dumped in with Bigfoot, so that's why we're including it here. They're seen in the Southwest, they're seen in Texas, they're seen in very humid climates, they're seen in the South. Like I said, over to Virginia gets them. Like I said, they're kind of described sometimes with more of a snout, sometimes with less of a snout. Known to be pretty aggressive, you know. But there really just isn't that much known about them other than people describe something that looks like some large, overgrown feral ape species. That's not Bigfoot, so that's why we're throwing it in here. I have heard reports of some of them towards like Anza Borrego, and then going towards the Arizona border, and then going through Arizona and the desert regions, which a monkey really doesn't make sense in the desert, but people see them, you know. So like I said, the devil monkeys is something that I honestly don't know that much about, and then every time I try to find information, it's about what I've told you. So it's one of those subjects that I'm still learning about. Every time I hear something, someone refers to a devil monkey, or hey, I think I saw like a feral, overgrown monkey running around in the woods. I'm like, well, tell me about that one. So more to come on that, basically. Yeah, but they do see them all the way to the East Coast, too. Like I said, Virginia has them, which is very odd. So I don't know if there's something a little more interdimensional, or if there's something more woo or paranormal, or something going on with these that isn't a flesh and blood creature, or they are, or they're escaped experiments. Everybody's like, oh, it's an escaped gorilla, it's an escaped this. Well, maybe these are some kind of experiment from some lab that they let out. There's lots of stories about that and theories in the Bigfoot world that certain genetic offshoots were created in a lab somewhat recently. They talk about true blood Bigfoot, some of the real deeper conspiracy theories, like your type 1s and your type 2s. And then some of these more extreme species, they talk about genetic mutilation, and they put trackers in them and they let them go to go see what they're doing. I mean, that's a theory, But basically, who knows on these guys? So the type 9 I find very fascinating. Have you guys ever heard of the Ohio Grassman? Ohio is surprisingly one of the biggest states for Bigfoot population because it has a really great balance of lots of woods and lots of people. And it does get really cold there too. But the Grassman, Ohio is one of those very interesting states to study for Bigfoot. As they have type 1s, you hear people talk about type 2s. People do talk about maybe even like the Wendigo varieties in certain areas. And then people report the Dogman creature, the upright walking canine thing. People report all sorts of weird stuff in Ohio. But people report something, especially workers in the woods, Forest Service people, more like laborers than actual like rangers. People who backcountry skiing and hiking, where they report like a tribe of human-sized hairy people that don't wear clothes that live out in the bushes. And we're not talking little ones, that's another category, or pugwudgies. We're not talking Bigfoot or like type 2s. We're talking something that's vaguely human in size, but is covered in hair and kind of almost like a feral human or like a hairy Neanderthal or some kind of a recessive throwback type human that people report in the Ohio area. And then other people have told me that it's not just in Ohio, deep dark regions of the United States also have pockets of these wild feral humans living out there that no one talks about or the government covers up. If you guys are familiar with Russia, they have the Almast or the Almasty, which is kind of their version of Bigfoot. And they have kind of two things going on there. They have big type 1 Bigfoots like ours. And then they have kind of a more Neanderthal-looking creature that they find back in their hills too, like a very primitive humans living. And that seems to be kind of what's going on with the Grassman specifically. But if you hear someone say the Ohio Grassman, they could be referring to a type 1 Bigfoot. They could be referring to these little guys. It's just kind of a term, like Mogollon Monster while they're referring to a Bigfoot, the Ohio Grassman, the Florida Skunk Ape, they could be referring to like a type 2 or that orangutan looking thing that we saw. So that's the Grassman, very elusive. There have been photographs, there has been videos of people. They're like, was that a person in a fur coat and a beard running across the road? Or was that wild people? What was that kind of a thing? So people see them, and I can't tell you much more about them other than it's kind of weird. So the type 10 is what people call the little people. There's also another tradition called Pukwudgies. Sorry, up here talking, getting dried out. 1 to 3 feet tall, little tiny guys. They look like if you put a toddler in a Bigfoot costume. They're just these little tiny hairy things. People report them as being very aggressive. People report them a lot around vortices portals. People run into them looking for regular Bigfoot, and they see a tribe of 2 or 3 of these little hairy things run across. And the Pukwudgies and the little people are sometimes reported to carry spears and sticks and be very aggressive, like they're protecting something. And another researcher friend of mine, Tom Seawood, he lives in where is it? Oh, I'm drawing a blank. Vancouver. He lives in Vancouver, Canada, and he's part of the Kwakwaka'wakw Ewok India tribe, and he's full-blooded Indian, and he's a Sasquatch guy, and he takes people out on boat tours through Puget Sound and all those other areas, and all those things up there, not Puget, whatever. He goes up there and he does all these different boat tours, and he's seen Bigfoots. And talking to him was very, very interesting because he talks about the Type 1 Bigfoots. They're known as the Zunigwas, which is the wild woman of the woods and the wild man of the woods. And the tale of the Zunigwa is kind of like the boogeyman. Don't go out at night or the Zunigwa will get you, the wild woman. The Zunigwa carries a wicker basket on their back, and they scoop up misbehaving kids and throw them in their basket. And he did a whole, I went to the International Bigfoot Conference, and he did a whole native dance where he had the costume and he narrated it. Well, it was absolutely spectacular. And their whole traditional native stories. And the Kwakwak-Ewok tribe is very fascinating because each family has a creation story. His family was the Thunderbird, another family has a bear, another one has a sea eagle, another one, and there actually is a Sasquatch family. And apparently, I guess long ago, before humans, all the families, everybody was an animal, and then through their creation god, they got turned into humans or something. And anyway, back to the point. It was very fascinating because they talk about, in their culture, they talk about Bigfoots like a bear or a raven or anything else. But they talk about two very distinct things. They talk about the Zunigwa, like I said, the wild man and wild woman of the woods. And they talk about the Bequis. And the Bequis is what they describe as the little people. They're 1, 2, 3 feet high at the tallest. Very tiny little folks. These little things that run around. And I guess the people who live in the bush, who still live off the land, who live in semi-native ways, who still fish and still do their stuff, they see Bigfoots from time to time. They know about them. And they know about the little people, the Bequis, but they rarely ever see it. Like, it's like once in a generation, once in 100 years, somebody in the tribe will actually see one. At least in that area in Vancouver, they're very rare. But they see signs of them. Apparently they draw on rocks, and they like to go into campsites and tip things over and play little jokes and pranks and move stuff around. And they always, oh, the Bequis did this, the little people, the small ones did this, but I guess they're very rarely seen. And then all through the Sierras, there's been reports of people going out looking for Bigfoot, and they stumble across these little guys. You guys are mostly here from Orange County, right? Yes. You guys been on Ortega Highway? Ortega Highway has a history of multiple people seeing a small, hairy-like Bigfoot little creature running across the road. And Blue Jay, those campgrounds and stuff back there, there's a history of what people describe as a little person, like a human dwarf, but completely hairy, going into campsites and, running through places on 2 legs, these little hairy-like creatures. Ortega Highway has a history of sightings of these little people. And every time I drive through there, I'm like, am I going to get to see one? I always think I'm going to wake up at like 2 in the morning and go for a late night drive, but it doesn't happen. But yeah, people see these little things, and they're seen all across the nation. Now, the Pukwudgies is an East Coast term for the little people, and they're described as being very ornery, mean, jagged. They have kind of spines on them, and they carry spears and little bows, and they have nothing nice to say. And the Pukwudgies have a more supernatural history to them. They can put spells on people, they can immobilize people, and they abduct people in the woods, and generally just really bad news little guys. And that's basically it on the little ones and the Pukwudgies. Kind of like when you start getting into more of these obscure things that are associated with Bigfoot, we don't know. We don't know that much about regular Bigfoots, Type 1s and Type 2s. So when you start talking about little ones and Pukwudgies and that Grassman thing and devil monkeys, it's kind of like, okay, this is what people are seeing. This is generally what they look like, and we either know if they're aggressive or not. And that's really about all we know. But know that through a lot of Native American cultures all throughout history and reports, people are seeing these little guys. So that's the Type 10, and there's a creature I kind of alluded to who deserves a dishonorable mention, the Dogman. If you guys have ever heard of the Beast of Bray Road, or the Michigan Dogman, or the Dogs of War from Mexico, there's a phenomenon that's grown. They've been sighted a long time. I talked to a lady a couple weeks ago, I just did a video on it, who saw one of these things in Wyoming in 1973, before it was in the lexicon. And most people, I kind of still refer to him as this. If you saw something like this, you're like, that's a werewolf. I don't know what you're talking about. They're reported all across the border. I guess there's a lot of reports. Even you guys ever heard of Rocky Elmore? Rocky Elmore is a retired Border Patrol agent, and he wrote a book called, I think it's Haunted Borders or something like that. He's been on a few podcasts. Amazing. And he talks about the ghost sightings that they had at the border and the Bigfoot sightings and things that they had. Because, you know, they're driving around the desert in the middle of the night, 2 or 3 in the morning, and some of the weird stuff that they see out there. You guys are UFO people. I mean, you guys get it, you know. There's a lot of weird stuff out there. And he has a lot of different sayings. And one of the things that comes across the border, and there's kind of a thing, because there's Bigfoot people and then there's Dogman as a whole other genre. There's researchers that just research this Dogman creature. And people see them, people report them. There's different varieties. Some look like a German Shepherd walking upright. Some have really broad shoulders. Some look more hyena-like. Some look very big. Some look small. Some of them report them in packs of like 20 or 30 of them with a big gray alpha male and a bunch of different sizes. But they're reported across the border. There's lots of stories of immigrants giving themselves up to the Border Patrol going, Lobos is chasing me. And quite fast, I mean, I would turn myself into the Border Patrol. Hey, Border Patrol, you got guns. This thing's after me. There's lots of stories and, you know, conspiracies out there that these things do exist across the United States and have for a very long time, and that they've sent in soldiers and special forces to fight these things with limited amount of success. They definitely, if Bigfoot has one toe in the paranormal pool, these things are definitely up to their waist in it. There's a lot of reports of very different things and materializing and dematerializing, but it's something that often gets brought up in the Bigfoot world nowadays is this Dogman creature. And there's a lot of conjecture. I was talking to people about this last night, like with the whole Slender Man thing and the rake. If you talk about something enough, people start seeing it more, and you start giving it more life. And there's a lot of conjecture whether the Dogman is more demonic than anything else. I mean, that thing looks like a demon to me. So there's a lot of conjecture that the more people are talking about it, the more people are seeing it. But in general, since it's such kind of a new thing, unless you're into the Bigfoot world and into this stuff, that if you saw one, you wouldn't know it. You're like, was that a dog running across the road at 7 feet high? You know, you wouldn't think to call it a Dogman. The closest thing you'd probably call it is a werewolf, and a werewolf's a monster that doesn't exist except for the Hollywood backlot. So what would you say if you saw this? But now that more and more people are starting to see these things, there's whole research organizations and people into it who are very into researching these things. And yeah, the Dogman is very, very scary. You know, looking in windows at people, chasing down people in their cars. I mean, there's all sorts of bloody murder stories out there about these creatures that we're not going to get into, but it's a lot out there. And to think it's some kind of modern horror, creepypasta, urban legend, internet thing, well, the Choctaw and Chickasaw tribes, like I mentioned earlier with their Bigfoot burial mounds, they have traditions of the Bigfoots and these things fighting each other. You get a clan of a family group of 6 or 7 Bigfoots fighting with 10 or 20 of these things. I would love to be like in a shark cage watching, you know. Really big, thick plexiglass shark cage with a cattle prod. I would love to watch that battle. I mean, that would just be like, yeah. I think there's a good movie there. Well, I'm almost done. Then we'll take a pause, and then I'll hang out and we can take some questions. So here's a possible Dogman track. As you can see, that's upwards of 7 inches long, which is quite large for a dog track. And what you see is the elongation of the rear paw, the forepaw, if you will, and then you see kind of the more splaying of the toes, which if you think of a dog trying to walk upright, kind of makes sense. But I don't know. The Dogman is a very mysterious creature. We'll kind of jump around a little bit here. So these tracks here, this kind of big nasty looking 3-toed thing next to a large glove, or no, that one's 4-toed. Sorry, it's kind of hard to tell. It looks great on the laptop, it looks crappy on the screen. This big thing here is reported to be a Dogman track. Now, I got these pictures from my friend at the North American Dogman Project. They have pictures, reported video, tracks. Just like I said, if there's a monster in this world, there's a group studying it. These guys do that. This here is a more traditional Bigfoot print. As you can see, you got 5 toes. You don't have claws. You see how wide that is and how it really digs into the ground. That's because they have midfoot flexibility. You got to think concave bottom of their foot, not convex like an arch like we have. That's to support all that weight. Where your ankle bones and your leg bones are back here, there are more in the middle, which makes that weird gait that you saw Patty with that little heel pop in the back. It just all has to do with their physiology. So this is a big footprint. These are reported Dogman tracks here with the 4 claws or 4 toes. And I don't know what those are, but if I was in the snow and I found big 3-toe tracks like that, I would be, if they're heading that way, I would be heading that way. Little tip from Matt Squatch. I found this for you guys because I figured you UFO people. This certainly clears up why we find very little of their scat. So I'm going to go back to the map really quick because I just wanted to break it down. We'll take a break here in a couple minutes. Florida skunk ape. Look at all those sightings in Florida. There's a lot there. So that's your skunk ape territory. This is your type 1 territory, kind of coming up into here. Type 1s. Your type 2s, your wood boogers, kind of from California, splitting between San Gabriel and Big Bear, going on over into Arizona, the Mogollon Rim, going up through the Midwest, and going to about halfway through the East Coast. This is your wood booger area here, especially down in the south. That's also where you get a lot of dogman sightings. They call it the Rougarou down here in the south. And then Michigan dogman and Beast of Bray Road in Ohio, all those kind of areas up through here. This is dogman territory. Although they are sighted in Sacramento, we get a lot of dogman sightings down here in the southwest as well. Like I said, I got one last week from Wyoming, which really threw me. Your Gugwees are kind of in that Missouri basin here. Your Wendigos seem to kind of be going from here, and then the offshoot of the Wendigos, the Genosquas, seem to be through here. Your type 4s, like I said, seem to kind of be like a northeast thing. They might be like a Patty type, but with more of a protruding face. The Michigan or Ohio grassman, Ohio. Devil monkeys, they're seen in the southwest, but they're also kind of seen more in the bush. I think like West Virginia area, you get reports of that kind of stuff, and in the south. They're kind of seen randomly, so I don't know what's going on with that devil monkey thing. The little people, you hear reports of them in the Sierras, and their ornery cousins with the little bows and spears, the Pugwudgies, they're seen kind of in the northeast and in Appalachia going on down there. And that's kind of the locations of the Bigfoots. That's basically it, and that's my presentation. I'm gonna leave this on the screen because I didn't have enough time to get business cards. So that's my email, my YouTube channel, Matt Squatch Presents. Matt Squatch was a nickname I had years ago when I worked. I had a big beard and crazy hair, and they said I looked like a Sasquatch. So they called me Matt Squatch. They wrote it, they Squatch, or you know. So it kind of stuck with me. So when I started a YouTube channel a while back, I just, what's a stupid name? So I put Matt Squatch Presents, and I didn't realize it was going to actually be popular. So.
Thank you, Matt. We'll take a 10-minute break now.
Okay, I'll come back and answer questions. So.